Welcome to the nation. Selamat Hari Merdeka to all our viewers out there. I'm Tamina Kausji, and of course today we will be focusing on the topic of Malaysia's nationhood. It is of course 58 years. So what do we have and what expectations do we see beyond today? So first of all, we'll just play an introductional video for you from Ideas, which is actually the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, because we have a very special in-house studio guest, Tricia, Yeoh, the CEO, who will be speaking to us very shortly. Do check it out first. All right, so that was a brief introduction. So now we cut to Tricia Yeoh, who's in the studio with us. Welcome to studios, Tricia.
Hi, Tamina.
All right, so before we get started off and launch into the topic at hand, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Well, thanks first of all for inviting me here today.
Absolutely.
I am from an econometrics background, which means that I am a researcher, an analyst, that kind of person.
Okay.
Yes. And for the past 8 to 9 years, I've been working in the field of public policy, public policy research, which really means that I look at national level policies and try to analyze them and see what we could recommend in order for national public policies to improve. So I've done that in various different fields. I've worked in independent think tanks in the private sector, and I've also worked in the state government in the Chief Minister's office. So in public, private and independent sectors, I would say I've been working in the area of public policy.
Right, okay, so that's a really, really well-rounded resume for what it is that you do. So you're currently attached with Ideas, which is the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs.
Exactly.
Now, tell us a little bit about Ideas and their whole background and what it is that Ideas hopes to achieve.
So Ideas is an independent, we call it cross-partisan think tank.
Right.
Cross-partisan in the sense that we are open to working with individuals of all parties, which means we don't just work with, say, government or the opposition, but we try and lobby and advocate for our policies to all sides, because we do believe in getting the buy-in from everyone. And also it helps that we are neutral, because it means we are able to say things without being called partisan in any way, or that we're being influenced by any parties. So we're independent in that sense. When we say think tank, a lot of people wonder what we do.
That's right. I think it's so let's define that first, Tricia, because I think that term is bandied around, think tank. But do people out there, our viewers, they actually like to know what is a think tank?
Sure. So a think tank is essentially just a research organization.
Right.
Okay. But we don't just stop at the research. So research is more for academics who are maybe in universities. So we try not to stay in this ivory tower of just doing our thinking, but we also want to liaise with the public. So we get the views from people on the ground. We hold
man on the street.
That's right, like men on the street or roundtable discussions, public forums, and with all this input from different stakeholders in society, whether it's the media or civil society or politicians or people on the street, we collate all these information. We put them into policy ideas in the form of maybe writings, articles, videos, infographics, things that people can relate to, and then we give this to government in the hopes that they will also adopt these to improve the way things are run in the country.
Okay, because the perspective comes from the people most affected by it.
Yes, exactly. So that's what we aim to do.
Right, okay. So that's very interesting, and I think it's a very timely thing to discuss today on this day of all days.
Yes.
What we believe and what Malaysians out there on the streets feel are some of the most pertinent issues.
Yes.
So based on your work through Ideas and via your other research, what would you say are, let's try and break it down. What would you say are perhaps the top 5 concerns of Malaysians out there today?
Okay, well, I think, firstly, happy 58th National Day, right, to all of us. I think we're coming close to 60 years already, and it's always a time for us to reflect reflect on the issues and problems and challenges of the country.
Right.
We do have to be honest with ourselves firstly, and face squarely the issues that we have. It doesn't do any good for us to brush it under the carpet, because it means that we won't be able to solve the problems. So I would say, if you're asking about the top 5 concerns that people have, one is essentially the economy.
That's right.
Number 2 is, and also this is reflected in our work, the governance or the lack thereof, especially of institutions in the country. And through our work, we try to strengthen those institutions. I can talk more about that later when we talk about our projects. Third, I think it's the education system.
Right, and I think that has been in the news, in and out, constantly and consistently on an upswing.
Yes, exactly.
It's definitely something of concern.
Yeah, so education is something that people always end up concluding as the problem when you speak of any other issues.
Very true. It all comes down to, but it's not enough to just conclude that. What can we do to fix it?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So that's the third, that's the education system. The fourth, I would say, is related to the economy, but it's also related to institutions. But I would put it as one main issue is the role of leadership.
Right, the role of leadership
in the government. So whether there is leadership or whether or not the right leaders have been given the right space to be able to exercise their views. And finally, the fifth, which is not to say the least of the 5, least important of the 5,
but among the top 5,
would be, I suppose, your civil and democratic space and rights to be exercised in this country. Yeah, and of course, many of these will overlap, but if you ask for 5, I would say those are the top 5.
Right, okay, well said indeed. Now let's try and look at each one of them individually, and also as in how they connect to each other to make a whole of what we expect and what our hopes are. So the economy first. Now what would you say is one of the biggest concerns currently, and why so?
Well, the biggest concern would really be the cost of living.
There you go.
I think, well, this year especially, with the onslaught of the GST, many people, both consumers and producers, are feeling the pinch of it. And sometimes it's also a psychological thing where even though certain goods are not GST imposed, but people have a general feel that their incomes are shrinking and therefore they should not be spending on certain luxury items. So you do see the impact of that, especially among the low-income communities. There have been studies that show that not all Malaysians have sufficient savings, especially savings that may last them till retirement age.
That's true.
Yeah, so the economy at a very personal level, I think that's of concern. But secondly, it's also the general Malaysian economy, meaning that whether our GDP is rising at a faster rate than inflation, whether the country itself has enough savings for the future. It doesn't help, of course, that recently with all the problems of our currency fluctuations, meaning
there's of course the
devaluation. Yes. And what happens after China's economy is also not doing too well.
Very true. It is a regional concern really, but I think Malaysians are currently very much internalized to the extent that there's sort of like a growing sense of discomfort. So now what can be done, and what is the type of approach which a think tank like Ideas, for example, might propose to help Malaysians cope with or deal with these ramifications?
I think for us, we see as one of the main problems the fact that government is very much involved in the economy and rather over-involved in the economy. And when that happens, you are actually squeezing out the space for a private sector to truly
flourish.
And we're talking not about your big conglomerates or the GLCs,
but
the small and medium entrepreneurs. And
there you go.
To get the small and medium entrepreneurs, the small business owners to be able to flourish, there has to be a level playing field. There has to be a more equal ground on which businesses can operate. And this means that sectors can no longer be so tightly controlled. We hope that the government takes steps to liberalize the economy and reduce the controls that essentially don't help small business owners. They only help maybe government-linked companies or companies that happen to
Right.
have good contacts
Already
or
and
cronies
already.
within
Right.
the government.
True enough. So, which is also true because especially an economy like Malaysia's and even in ASEAN, over 60% of the economy anyway depends on these smaller companies.
Yes,
But
yes,
at the same
exactly.
time, they're sort of being stifled. So that's what needs to be fixed.
Yeah, and we
Right.
really do think that by opening up, more people will have the opportunities to engage in their own trade freely.
Right.
And this free exchange of goods and services is what will make them eventually create the higher incomes and jobs for themselves.
That's right. So to
Yeah.
actually empower the people themselves.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
So it's not really a
exactly.
lofty dream, but it's something that can practicably be exercised.
Yes, well, we hope so.
Right.
Well, the government has actually said that they wanted to divest their shares in government-owned or government-linked companies.
Yes.
But we don't really know the success of that to date because even though they may have divested some shares, more recently we see the certain, not just government-linked companies, but government-owned entities
Right.
which are able to operate with very little governance and oversight.
That is
so,
true.
I mean, for instance, the crisis that we have today, I don't have to name it. I think people would know
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. So these entities, which are so easily formed by government, those need to have better governance and oversight, which it comes
That's
to
right.
the second point,
which is
I'll
how
come to.
That's
Yeah.
right. So the second point, of course, as you were making,
Yeah, which is about the institutions.
Right.
So you talked about the fire, so we've covered the economy, right?
That's right.
The second one is on institutions. So this talks about whether or not the institutions like the media, the judiciary, even things like the anti-corruption agencies, are they strong, robust, and independent enough to be
Right.
able to secure our rights as Malaysian citizens?
There you
So one of the projects actually is something that Malaysia is working on, that IDEAS is working on right now.
Right. So we'll get back to that right after the commercial break.
Okay,
Right.
sure.
So let's quickly, and we'll be back later on with Tricia Yeoh still in the studio speaking to us about Malaysian nationhood and beyond. Stay with us.
Government kita nak kasih license, lagi nak tengok orang berapa orang ada jual sini. Lagi nak tengok barang-barang apa yang kau jual dulu. Bila kau nak minta, ni memang panggil tunggu. Kita sudah minta 10 kali pun tak boleh dapat.
Di sekolah tu memang perbelanjaan pergi sekolah tu memang mahal lah sebab tambang semuanya dah naik.
Kalau 4,000 sewa rumah, ada kereta, ada anak 3, tak cukup tau. Masih lagi miskin tu tak cukup belanja tak.
So many problems, but what are the solutions? Usually, it starts with an idea.
IDEAS, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, is an independent think tank in Malaysia that works to provide public policy solutions to these challenges. In other words, we come up with proposals based on our 4 principles. That every Malaysian citizen is subject to the same rules and laws. That the government should not interfere too much in the economy. That there should be limits and balances to the power of the government. And that we should all be free to pursue our own happiness as long as it doesn't hurt others or break the law. Stop there, we turn our ideas into actions.
The IDEAS Autism Center has allowed parents to receive an education, therapy and care for their autistic children that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise at almost no fees.
Ideas gives young Malaysians the channels and the space to discuss politics, philosophy, economics and government openly without fear or judgment.
I think in a very short period of time, Ideas has brought together a group of very young, dynamic, creative, energetic and impactful group of individuals, and I'm very sure that the work that they are doing now would lead to greater things in the future.
My ministry and I have been working frequently with Ideas in the area of transparency, governance, integrity, anti-corruption and other areas of public policy, and we have found them to be highly professional and competent.
We do our best to boost the education system, to wage battle against corruption, to create greater transparency in government, to forge closer ties between our brothers and sisters throughout Southeast Asia.
And it all starts with an idea.
Right, so that in a nutshell is what Ideas does. Now back to you, Tricia. Right, so as we were saying, institutions in Malaysia. Now, what would you say is the main focus of the type of work that Ideas does towards approaching the limitations here?
So I can give you an example.
Right, sure.
One of our big projects right now is aiming to have some constitutional and legal changes so that we can make the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, the MACC, more independent, in the sense that they will not be subject to political interference by the executive.
Okay, so they can maintain their...
They can maintain their independence. They have security of tenure, so they don't get sacked or removed from their positions anytime the government wants to remove them in case they're investigating something sensitive. We also want to give them the hire and fire power so that they can hire their own staff and recruit them and promote them according to who they think is best, based on merit. So that's one way of strengthening a very important institution that will look at transparency and maintaining any anti-corruption measures in the government. So that's one big area. And other institutions that we would fight for and promote would be even within government itself. So for, say, the budget agencies that are preparing budgets, which is very important, they look at the numbers.
Absolutely, they're the ones who give us the breakdown, and then that's what the people have to work with.
Yeah, and for the entire year ahead.
That's right.
So we would like to push for better budget transparency, where government agencies within the Treasury will give more information to the public and tell you exactly how they are spending their money.
That's right.
And because ultimately it is public money that is being spent. So telling you where your money is being spent, making sure it's accountable, and making sure that it's reported accurately by the end of the year. So that's another example. And there are many other similar examples where we want to strengthen such institutions.
Naturally, because anything that promotes the impartiality is only going to lead to better nationhood.
Yes, exactly. And improving public confidence in the economy. So back to the first point.
That's right.
And foreign trust as well. So if the investors feel that your political institutions are independent and well managed, well governed, you know, they are accountable, there's no shenanigans happening, then they would more likely feel that they can trust coming into the country, bringing their families here, and there's more security overall.
Because currently also there's a little bit of an atmosphere, especially among not just the expatriate but the foreign investment community, that Malaysia is a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you have, say, proven bribery or contracts that are not being transparently given and corruption, then why would they come here? Because it means there's a loss in the amount that they're putting into their company, into their business.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, speaking about trying to backtrack a little bit, where does this sort of, from an academic perspective, just share with our viewers, where does this sort of system of, you know, in that sense of accepting, receiving bribes, where does it actually originate from? Does it have its roots in our post-colonial history, perhaps, or does it go beyond that into culture?
Well, I think when corruption becomes a norm rather than an exception, more people will feel inclined to do it just because you don't want to be the person left out.
Okay, right.
But we are trying to break that thinking and to tell Malaysians that, look, it's not built into your culture to be corrupt.
That's right.
This is something that you can grow out of, and once you make it to, when you make transparency and non-bribery to be the norm rather than the exception, then you will pressure people into signing up, I suppose, to some kind of a
That's right.
I'm not going to bribe today, or I'm not going to accept
almost
bribes.
a pact with yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So just to end, and this has been a wonderful opportunity to speak to you about your ideas itself, what is your message to Malaysians out there on their 58th anniversary as a nation, as a people?
Yeah, I would say celebrate diversity.
Right.
Don't listen to authorities that tell you unity has to be interpreted only in one way.
Right.
We are such a colorful people. We should embrace those differences. Don't go to war because of those differences, and help people regardless of race and color and creed and religion. Everyone should be proud to be Malaysian no matter who you are. I mean, we have different kinds of blood in us. So we don't want to stereotype and categorize ourselves into these little boxes of Malay, Chinese, Indian, and Lion.
That's right.
I think we've grown out of that box system.
That's right.
We come from so many different roots, and we should be able to celebrate all of them equally, and stop talking about all these race problems, because
that's right.
That's a false notion of our past. You know,
and the future is much brighter.
No, the future is colorful.
There you go.
So don't stereotype us and categorize us.
Right.
Yeah,
okay. So thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you.
So once again, Selamat Hari Merdeka to all our viewers out there. And as Tricia said, our future is colorful. So let's make it that way. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next episode.